So over the last few weeks, I have had the opportunity to extensively use both Mac and Windows in addition to my regular Linux usage. And what I want to do today is talk about some of the things that I noticed that Linux does absolutely better than either of those platforms. Now, I am firmly of the opinion that you use the tools that you need to use. So if you need to use Mac or Windows, I highly understand that, because one of the reasons why I had to choose to use those platforms is because I too needed to use those for things I needed to do. That was a lot of words, but you get the point. I was very wordy there. So I understand if you have to use those things, so I'm not going to make this video to bash either Mac or Windows. They both have their places, they both have their obvious flaws, and I'll talk about some of those things, but they definitely aren't Linux. So what I want to do today is kind of talk about some of the things that Linux just does better. And some of these will be a little bit more ephemeral, subjective, and just kind of very surface level. One of them is very Gen Z-ish, if you will, so we'll have to deal with that. But some of them are actual things. So let's go ahead and jump in. But before we do, if you leave a thumbs up on this video, I'd be really appreciative. It'd really help the channel. So the first thing I think has to be said, and that is that Linux does customization way better. Like way better. Now, if you use Mac or you use Windows, there are ways of customizing the interface. That's absolutely true. You can go through and use a window manager on Mac. I think there are window managers for Windows. There are programs that you can use to highly customize the look and feel of Windows to make it look awesome. If you've seen some Windows screenshots on Unix porn, you'll know that it can look, if you put the work in, phenomenal, like really good, and nothing like Windows. So those platforms can be customized, but that stuff all is very hacky, especially on the Windows part, and none of it is as accessible as customization is on Linux. So the first one has to be customization, because on Linux you can customize literally everything, and if something comes up where you can't customize it, there's always some way you can customize it on something else. So whether it's a different distro or a different desktop environment or a different window manager, whatever, chances are you can find something that does it the way you want it to do it, or that can be made to do it the way you want to do it. Again, wordy, but you understand what I'm talking about. The next one I'm not quite sure that I should have put on the list, and it's because it's so Gen Z. And I know we give the Gen Z guys a lot of crap, but that's just because they've come up with a lot of terms that make us millennials and the older generations, which is just weird to say that the millennials are the older generation now, but the older generations just kind of look at them like, what does that mean? What are those words? And one of those words is vibes. And maybe it's not even Gen Z. Maybe it's even like whatever comes after Gen Z. I don't even know. But For me, I think that this is actually the biggest one, because I always knew that customization was way better on Linux than it is on Windows or Mac. But as I used both Windows and Macintosh over the course of the last few weeks, I couldn't remove the thought from my mind that I was in a prison. Now, in the case of Mac, for example, and I have one literally right here, I will say that it's a very pretty prison. Out of the box, their dark mode is better than any dark mode I've ever seen in my life. I will flatly argue with anyone who says that their default dark mode is better. Now, Adwaita dark is pretty good, but that has transparency. You know what I mean? It's very pretty. But as I used it more and more, there are just certain decisions that they've made that are irreversible or just not well thought out that just bugged the crap out of me, and there's no good way to change those. So for example, the Mac defaults to natural scrolling, which basically means that the scrolling that we've all been used to forever is reversed. Now, a lot of Windows do these too, like if you're on a laptop, so it's fine. But on Mac, at least on my Mac, natural scrolling is the only scrolling that works well. Especially if you use another mouse. So like I have a MX Master 3 here, and I don't want to use natural scrolling with a scroll wheel. Like, that's just dumb. So I changed it. The scrolling on Mac, when you make it like normal scrolling, is so jaggedy and just not good. So you have the option between doing it backwards, from where you're normally used to, or using it bad. Now, maybe this is just a me problem. Maybe it's I noticed it mostly in Vivaldi, so maybe it's a Vivaldi problem. But it just was a bad experience. And another thing was the ability to go to your home directory in Finder. Like, Finder is actually a piece of garbage. It's pretty garbage, but it is garbage. Now, I am a file manager aficionado. I think I'm the I would go so far as to say I'm like the premier Linux YouTuber when it comes to file managers. I love those damn things. Crusader is my heart and soul. I think it's fantastic. I will also pimp out like Double Commander and a whole bunch of other ones. They're all really, really good. One of the things that Linux does really, really well is have good access to file managers. Finder on the Mac is garbage. Going to your home directory in Finder is a chore. Now, you can do it if you're in a certain view. If you're in the column view, you can actually get back to your home directory. Otherwise, you're limited to what's in the sidebar by default. It's stupid. Like, why is it that way? It shouldn't be that way. Like, I want to go to my home directory. That's where I mounted my NFS shares in my home directory, because I thought, well, it would be easy to get to my home directory, and you can in the terminal, but getting to it in the graphical finder is not easy. Now, once I did it, it was fine, but still, the fact that I had to go through hoops just to do that was stupid. And over again, there's these little things, right, that just, they're decisions that I don't agree with. Not necessarily mean that they're bad decisions, but just that I don't agree with. And it made me feel this sense of I'm pushing at the walls. You know, like I'm in a box. It's a very pretty box, but I'm pushing at the walls, trying to figure out how to do things the way that I need them done. And unlike on Linux, where I can basically craft my workflow however I want so that it fits the way I want to do things, on Mac, you do things the way Apple wants you to do them, or you don't do them at all. And Windows is kind of the same way. It's a little freer than Macintosh, I would say. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Windows subsystem for Linux exists. And I have a video on that coming up pretty soon, so subscribe if you'd like to see that. But overall, both of those platforms are much more their walled gardens is what a lot of people call them. I just call them cages, because you get into this sense that it's just, you know, their way or the highway. And it's not surprising. It's proprietary software, and they have a way they want to do things. So there's nothing particularly wrong with it. But after you've gotten used to the way Linux does things with their customization and their fancy kernels and the way, you know, their options and choices and all this stuff, it's really hard to go to a place where there's not all that stuff. And that's what I mean by vibes. It felt really, really constraining, very limited. So Linux definitely does vibes better. I know that was like 10 minutes of me talking about vibes, and that's 10 minutes more than I've ever talked about vibes in my entire life. So we need to move on. So the next one is kind of, a lot of these are very interconnected, and the next one is options and choices. I will argue that open source provides too many choices and not enough choices. It's very a good and bad thing. We've talked about this many times on this channel before. You know, new users having to come in and choose between a million different distros is not necessarily a good thing, but we also have those choices, and that is a good thing. So being able to choose what file manager that I want to use, that's cool. Now, you can do that on Mac and Windows. I should point that out. You can do that, but it's not as good because it's not default, right? You can't, like, you can't get rid of Finder. Like, you can't get rid of it. Like, if you can't do it. If I was using GNOME and I wanted to get rid of Nautilus and replace it with Thunar or Nemo or Crusader or whatever, I could do that very easily. It would work perfectly fine. It's not going to kill GNOME. Now, it used to kill GNOME. I don't think it would anymore. Definitely, if you wanted to uninstall Dolphin, you couldn't uninstall Dolphin. Now, you're going to be left with a whole bunch of interdependencies that kind of have to stay behind, but the program itself would go away. You could just install Crusader and use Crusader or whatever you wanted to do. On Mac, Finder's going to stay there whether you like it or not. Same with Windows Explorer. You have to keep it there. You can't uninstall, you can't get rid of it. It's going to be there. And whenever you need to, say, open up a file or something from the browser, you're going to be met with that file chooser, period. You can't change it. So being able to make those changes, whether it's just the little things like the file manager or choosing the way things look or whatever, having that option to choose a different distro if it doesn't work on your hardware or whatever. You know, all of these things, these options and choices, while we complain about them making it harder for new users, is one of the things that just makes Linux different than Mac and Windows. If you want to use Mac, you're using a Mac. That's Mac OS is the thing, right? There's no other options on a Mac. That's what you're going to do. Now you could use Linux on it, but that would almost defeat the purpose of using a Mac. Windows, you're going to use one version of Windows. You're going to use Windows 11 until, or I suppose you could use Windows 10, but they're basically the same thing. Just one's going to lose support pretty soon, whereas the other one's going to be supported for a little while. So Windows is Windows, right? So on Linux, you have a ton of options and choices and stuff like that, and I think that it's a premier difference. It's definitely one thing that I consider better than just using the thing. Now, the fourth one is security and privacy. Now, I have argued on this channel that Linux isn't actually more secure than Windows in terms of the actual code, because there's nothing secure about a piece of software that has 25 or 30 million lines of code, right? You can't be that big in terms of code base and be like ultra secure. It's just impossible to do. Windows has the same problem. Mac, I'm sure, it has the exact same problem. I don't know how many lines of code they are, but the basic idea there is just that you can't be secure and be that big at the same time. It's just those things are incompatible. But I will say, at least from a obscurity standpoint, or the ability to just kind of avoid most of the security flaws that Mac and Windows have, specifically Windows, Linux is more secure in that way. Also, I would say that because it's usually the case that Linux isn't very corporatized. Now, there are obvious exceptions to this, but even the distros that are run by corporations tend to take privacy a little bit more seriously. And because there are so many choices, if you don't like the privacy stance of, say, Red Hat or whatever, you can move to a different distro and enjoy their privacy policy or whatever. So the ability to have those options, which we've talked about, allows you to basically choose how private this thing is. And because it's open source, if you really wanted to, you could fork it and make it like super like locked down secure and create something like Tails or Cubes OS, right? So those things exist and very ultra secure and ultra private. So those are things that kind of don't really exist in the Windows and Macintosh world. And also, you can't say that it's not true. Both Microsoft and Apple are gigantic corporations who very much enjoy taking your money, and including my money, by the way. So because that's true, they're going to try to take as much money as possible from you in a legal way. They're not going to rob you or anything, but by making the choices you do on their platforms, you're going to give them more money. And the more they can get you to do that, the better off it is for them. So that leads them, in some cases, specifically on Microsoft, to make choices that aren't in favor of security and privacy. Things like putting advertisements all over the damn place. What are you doing, Microsoft? And this Macintosh, I spent like $800 on this damn thing, and there's ads for the App Store in places that shouldn't be there. Also, fuck you, Apple. I don't want to use Apple Intelligence. Stop telling me I have to do so. I don't want to do so ever. It's bad. Like, just give me ChatGPT. At least it's somewhat useful. And dubious as that statement was, it's better than Apple Intelligence, which is just a front end for ChatGPT. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have been ranting, but it's just very annoying, right? So security and privacy are always going to be better on Linux, just simply because it's not as driven towards that ultimate goal. Now, people are going to move into the whole corporate thing in terms of Red Hat and Canonical and OpenSUSE and all this stuff, or SUSE, I should say, and all that stuff. There are corporations in the Linux and open source sphere. That's absolutely true. Red Hat has been notorious for making some very anti-consumer decisions over the course of the last few years. SUSE has done the exact same thing, got very entrenched in politics and pissed a lot of people off. Canonical, who the fuck knows what they're doing these days? I don't even know. I mean, they look very quiet there wherever they're based in the UK. You just never hear from them, so they do exist. And that's the next one on the list, is that well, that's absolutely true that Linux does have corporate controllers in terms of some of their distros. I think that those corporations are better than Microsoft and Apple. Now, this may very well be naivete. Maybe I'm being very naive here in thinking that Red Hat and SUSE and Canonical are at least slightly better in terms of corporations than Microsoft and Apple. I say that I say that they are simply because it feels like they're more entrenched in the open source sphere and therefore can be trusted just a tad more. Now, can they be trusted all the way? Absolutely not. Do they make bad decisions all the time? Yes, they do. Do they contribute to open source? Yes, they do. And I think that gives them a little bit of a step up when it comes to Apple and Microsoft. Now, of course, Apple and Microsoft probably also contribute to open source quite a bit. I know Microsoft for sure contributes to the Linux kernel and stuff like that, but they are also very opportunistic contributors, right? They're doing it for their own benefit and not for the benefit of others. Where at least with like Red Hat and Canonical and SUSE, a lot of their decisions maybe are a little self-serving as well, but also serve other people a lot more in terms there's more equality there in terms of how those decisions work. Again, maybe this is very naive, but it feels like we have better corporate friends here than on the other side. So I think that that's true. You can argue that, and it's really my kind of iffiest point here, but I think that is true. So the last one I want to talk about is automation, because I asked this question on both my Discord and my Fediverse, and I asked them, what do you guys think that Linux does better than Windows or Mac? And one of the things that someone told me to talk to me about was services. Now, I wasn't going to get into the nerdy stuff of like systemd services and stuff like that, but what that made me think of was automation, because while both Windows and Mac do have ways of automating things, they're very controlled automations. So you get into automator or whatever they call it nowadays, shortcuts on Mac, or you can do something similar on Windows where you can do these things, and it's fine, but it's not quite as freeing as being able to hop into a terminal, write a script, and then start it on boot during your boot up to do that thing, whatever you wrote the script to do. Now, you could theoretically do that on Macintosh because it is based in BSD, so you could do a lot of the Linuxy stuff there, but it's not official. I mean, maybe it is officially supported, but it's not forward-facing and new user-friendly or any of those things. Like, it's just not like a thing that normal people are going to do. Whereas on Linux, you do that kind of stuff all the time. Now, maybe that's off-putting to some new users, but you can hop into the terminal and make yourself a bash script and just run that thing at boot, and it could do a whole bunch of automated service. It could do a lot of automated stuff, and more beyond just being able to do it, you have access to more lower level stuff on Linux to mess around with when it comes to your scripts. So you could move windows around, you can spawn new windows, you can move files around even into places that are password protected. You can do all these things that, you could mess around with system files. You can do basically whatever you want when it comes to a script on Linux, where you're going to be more constrained on Mac and Windows. It's just absolutely the case because it is more of a button-down system. So there are obviously reasons why they have it that way, much more secure, I suppose, much less likely to get messed up because a user doesn't know what they're doing. But your ability to automate basically everything on Linux is, I think, much better than it is on either of the two platforms, and that just can't be denied. So I'm sure that there are multiple other things that Linux does better than Windows. And there are obviously things that Linux does worse than Windows and Mac. Absolutely, I've made those videos before. But I think that my experience over the last couple of weeks, I think it really does come back down to those vibes. And when I'm using this Mac here to edit a video, I can't wait to come running back to Linux. It feels so much better. Now, that's bias, right? Like, I have a bias towards Linux, absolutely. I'm a Linux nerd, shopped at thelinuxcast.org. But the point I'm trying to make, right, is that I feel better on Linux. I feel more free. And someone told me to talk about freedom and stuff like that, but I wanted to avoid that. But it is true. I feel more free to do the things I want to do on Linux than I do on the other two platforms. And that can't be discounted at all. Now, is it going to be that way for everybody? I don't know. Maybe regular old Windows user comes to Linux and doesn't feel as free because they don't have the knowledge that I have. And there's a little bit of gatekeeping going on my end. But I think that if you get past that knowledge barrier and actually experience Linux for how it's supposed to be, that freedom that you have to do whatever you want is so good. It just feels good. It feels like, if you know what I mean. So that's it for this one. If you have anything that you want to share, you can do that in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. That really helps the video, by the way. If you leave a comment, leave a like. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd really appreciate it. You can follow me on Mastodon. That link will be in the video description. You can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/linuxcast. There you'll find a weekly exclusive podcast that I do. Basically, it's just me sitting down in front of this microphone for 15 minutes or so, rambling about other nonsense I talked about, the reasons behind me getting a Mac over there. So if you want to go over there, check that out, you can do so. I'm also posting that stuff on YouTube, so you can support me here on YouTube as well, so and get that you can get that podcast as well. Well, that's a lot of as wells there, so you can tell it's time for me to wrap it up for the night. So thanks for everybody who does support me on Patreon and YouTube. You guys are all absolutely amazing. Without you, the channel just would not be anywhere near where it is right now. So thank you so very much for your support. I truly, honestly do appreciate it. Thank you so very much. I truly do appreciate it. I need to find another word than appreciate there as well, but you guys know me in the ending. So thank you so very much to all these people. Thank you, and thank you for watching. I will see you next time. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. See you next time.